And we're live. Okay, we're on now. It's just me and Charles Thomas right now. How you doing, Charles?
That's fine.
This is our live stream for the month of July for the supporters on Patreon and Maker Support, and of course the co-hosts are also invited. So we'll see who else is stepping in. So what's on your mind right now, Charles?
Well, let's see about the hypocrisy of the left, and there's plenty to talk about there. You can talk in past, but it's recent and such. The whole Trump Putin talks, and how, oh my gosh, Russia, it was involved in the elections and such, even though it, pretty much all the information that we have gathered, it seems that the Russians not only do this up, but we also do that to the Russians and other people across the planet. The left doesn't talk about that. But it seems to me, it's amazing to me how the left seems to now trust all the, the security apparatus, the intels and everything, the CIA and the FBI, all that stuff.
Well, not that it's something they agree with. How you doing, Fourth Root?
I'm doing great. How are you doing?
All right. I think you got in while Charles was on a roll, so I was trying to get in and say hi, but you can go ahead and keep going, Charles, if you want.
Well, like I said, it's just that a lot of these people are just they don't have any type of, it just seems like they flip-flop back and forth. I'm like, what about
that's adorable there. That's adorable there, Alex.
I know. It's just like it continues. Oh, that's nice, kid. But yeah, it's just, I would like to see a little consistency. That's what I want to see. That's what I would like.
Just give up on that right now. It's not happening.
I know, but it'd be nice.
I think the position I've always taken is that there wasn't really much of a way to prove that the Russians weren't involved, except for the DNC hacks, which they figured out was copied over to a.
I'm chatting with Shane DK. Is my microphone on? Sorry.
Yeah, your mic's on.
Oh, sorry.
But that it was copied over to a USB drive, so obviously it couldn't have been anyone from Russia that's doing it, and I think they were including it there. But there are a couple of other things that may or may not have been the Russians, and I think the only one that has been definitively linked to Russia is the attempt to hack the voting machines. And from what I can tell, at least, it really seems just like it was proof of concept to see if they could do it. And they really couldn't, because our elections here are too decentralized for that. They might be able to, change a local election here or there that they wouldn't really care about, but they couldn't change who's president.
No, exactly. I think a lot of people are still mad about that type of, Hillary losing. And I just, the people who have done that, the same liberals who would just like to go back to sleep when when it's the same type of reverence. If you remember way back in the Bush years, remember those years when they said Bush should be impeached and all this stuff and all these things, they're doing all these marches and saying Bush needed to be impeached and everything about the Iraq wars and everything else. Then after President Obama came in office and the wars still happen, not much protesting. You notice these things, don't you? It's just like there were some who were always, and I got props to them, but yet they were just like ignored and no one really cared. They went back to just say, oh, we can go to sleep. It's all good. They forgot about it. And now,
the problem with things like they were these huge anti-war people when Bush was in office, and then when Obama got into office, well, they stopped being anti-war. But now that Trump's in office, they don't seem to have gone back to being anti-war. It's like they just kind of kept going with it.
Well, that's the thing. It's just there's no consistency. I would like to see some consistency, but no, sadly, there's none. And that pisses me off, though, because I got into, the politics stuff was like anti-Bush stuff, looking into all these type of things. And now it's just, it's just the same type of, it's the same old stuff. Nothing really change. It just seems like they just want to go tit for tat. They want to have, oh my gosh, they want to have, this Democrat narrative. And it's just like they talk about these things. Like, for example, the immigration debate and such. I'm like, you do realize that President Obama had the whole system was already locked down when he was in charge, right? I'm like, did they not know this stuff? And they have Google, they all looked this up. And I'm sitting here, I'm like, you don't get this. No one gets it. And I'm like, it's just, again, it's all about the narratives. And I just can't stand that type of hypocrisy. And when you have this great device of the internet, not just looking on Google or Wikipedia or whatever, you can find articles, actual articles, YouTube videos, news articles, all these things that will document this stuff. But yet they don't look these things. They look at these hot takes and such, and they don't do any type of research. I try to do research. And what do you get is just this, people just they're like, oh, we can't talk about that now. That's that whataboutism. We're doing. I'm like, okay, fine. We'll just y'all just do the same thing, and then when the other guy's in office, guess what you're gonna do? You go right back to sleep.
How you doing, Ben?
Doing great, Shane. Thanks for running this live stream. I've never said hi to you before, but I've talked to you a couple of times on Twitter. You're an awesome guy, and I love your shows that you put out. So I just wanted to stop in and see what this was all about.
Oh, thanks, man. It's good to hear from you. Yeah, it's not really about anything. It's kind of like whatever we feel like talking about at the time. It's pretty much for the patrons. So, if you're a supporter, you can always come in and I'll give you the priority. I'll try to get Charles to shut up.
Don't worry. But, if you have anything to say, go right ahead.
No, I just wanted to listen to what the smart people were talking about.
Oh, I'm not that smart. I'm just really observant.
He's good at pretending. That's what it is. But it's like the whole Trump Putin thing the other day. I haven't really had a chance to read up on what they actually did, but it's like so many on the left were like, oh, he met with Putin. That's treason. Get him for treason. I'm like, okay, you know that Russia isn't actually an enemy, right? And you know that back when Russia was an enemy, Kennedy talked to Khrushchev and actually stopped, the Cuban Missile Crisis that way. And they talked all the time, and no one said that was treason. Yeah.
I think a lot of people have this idea where since Russia talked to Russia, messing with our elections or something, and then talking to Putin, who probably did or did not. Did they probably? It's like, oh, you tampered our election. I'm like, okay, fine, but if you want to go and say Russia should be tried for war crimes and such, when is the United States going to be tried for that type of stuff? Not just locally, but national, not in a world stage. So I just sit back. And I'm just saying, well, when's the date? When's the date? Because you can't just say America does it, that's fine. But when anyone else does it, that's wrong.
And I don't think any of us here like Putin or like anything the Russian government does. I mean, they're a horrible government.
Yeah. I mean, yes, he's a KGB guy, and quite obviously he's had people killed or actually had his hand on the trigger at several points. But that doesn't mean that we want to see any sort of like tensions escalate between us and them. And if somehow through his bumbling, Trump somehow manages to put us in a better position to negotiating something with them, fine. My reasons for hating Trump extend almost entirely to his economic policy and the war he's driving us to with Canada, with trading.
Oh, China too, but
yeah. Oh my God! Like, what is he thinking? Like, does he hate the economy?
But then again, it's just with all that stuff getting into that. I'm not much into the economy or anything else. You're probably more reverse to it. I'm just saying it's probably him just to, we're just trying to make America great again. I'm like, you do realize trade and everything else does matter, right?
Right.
Well, it's like what we've been saying on the podcast. It's like if he really wanted to help the economy and help, you know, trade and everything, he'd be doing exactly the opposite of what he's doing now.
Right. Which is just like you hear him say one thing where he's like all about workers' jobs and all about putting America back to work and all this bullshit. But at the same time, like, you does understand that every economist that's ever been worth his salt has said that lowering tariffs, getting rid of the impediments to free trade, that's how you grow an economy. And he's just like, nope. I think that we're at a trade deficit, and that's bad for some reason.
Yeah, I said this on the podcast. It just makes no sense to me. We're getting more things than we're giving, and that's somehow bad. And more people want to invest in America than want to invest in Europe, and that's somehow bad too. You know?
Yeah, I know. The fact, like, Shane, your videos, the way that you source them are just awesome, because I never feel like I just have to buy anything that you say in your video. It's always like, this is what I have to say, and this is the organization that researched this, and this is their article that they posted. Boom.
Yeah, I mean, that's why don't listen to me. I'm just a schmo somewhere. Don't listen to me, but check my sources, please.
I think the fundamental error that most people make is they do not understand what wealth is, just as a concept, and they conflate that with money, and so so many people will all too often fallaciously assume that because a rich person is rich, that fundamentally means, oh, there's less money in the hands of the poor people, and so there's less wealth in that. And you always have to start at the very basics, and that's the ultimate frustration, because everybody does that.
Well, and they also conflate money with value when they're two separate things. You know, I keep trying to say, you know, the price is a ratio between the value of the currency and the value of the good or services, because there's both of those things going on there. But when you start thinking of just the dollar amounts as value, I think I'm getting an echo from someone somewhere. I'm not sure. Okay, I'm not getting it now. But when you do that, that's where you get into things like the trade deficit, because they're just looking at the dollar values of things going back and forth. But like I said, the reason why is because American stuff is valued more than European stuff. And that's where that so-called deficit comes from.
Yeah. And what economist did you play as part of that podcast? I can't remember his name.
Oh, that was Milton Friedman.
Oh, was it Milton Friedman? Okay.
Yep. I know a lot of libertarians hate on him, but I can't help liking him.
Why would anyone hate on him? He does such a great job of explaining his points, and he breaks it down Barney style, which is just awesome. Like, he never expects you to like have to wrap your head around the whole concept at once. He puts it in little bite-sized pieces, and he lets you kind of like find your way to the answer as he's explaining it. And you go, oh.
Well, they don't like it because there's a lot of stuff he said that wasn't quite libertarian. Like he wanted his form of welfare in the form of negative income tax. We have him to blame for tax withholding and things like that. So he was far from perfect.
Yeah. Well, he's not libertarian. He's just fundamentally a sound economist, and those usually are one and the same. But he's more or less neutral on the grounds of, you know, whether liberty is you know, valuable in itself. So the negative income tax makes total sense from the perspective that you should help the poor at the expense of the rich. If you're going to do that, the way you would do that is through the negative income tax. And that's mostly what he said.
Well, it certainly makes a lot more sense than the crazy welfare state they have now.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, at least the mathematics of Friedman's idea works out.
The one problem I come into is, like, I've got a few friends that basically require state aid to basically survive and like pay for their health care. Like, there's no way that they could have paid for, like, my one friend, he's got a disease that causes like really bad arthritis from like the age of like 4. He started developing it, and like it got really bad into his teen years. And like his parents had no financial means to pay for that. But like part of me wants to try and get into the explanation of like, well, healthcare costs would have been a lot lower had the government not started interfering back in like World War II era with the...
Well, that's the thing. I don't blame people like that, because government has been messing around with healthcare and messing around with the economy. You know, so I don't really blame people when they say, gee, this is crazy. I don't have any choice here. This is my health at stake. I got to go on government assistance.
Yeah. And, yeah, you know, there is a, invariably there are going to be people, even if you had a perfect libertarian economy, where, you know, nobody's coerced to subsidize anybody else's, there's going to be some people who just absolutely cannot produce enough wealth to sustain themselves. And charity, a private charity might be able to, and probably would be able to, provide for those people. But then there's the question is, well, what if it can't? You know, what and assuming that it can't, would force be justified, to just, you know, in the most economically sound way, for example, the negative income tax, to provide for those people? That's the question that I think divides people between Milton Friedman and other libertarians, is because Milton Friedman might agree, yeah, in certain cases that would be justified, but then there's the fundamentalist libertarian who goes, no, that's an initiation of force. You can't do that.
Well, and it's also the case of, you know, you have to not have that tunnel vision and just think about the fact that if you do this, then it's not too long before you're in the mess we are now. I mean, you can absolutely go and look at welfare states and see poor people who've fallen through the cracks. Look at states with universal health care and see people who have fallen through the cracks and don't get the health care they need. I mean, you're always going to be able to look at any system and find problems. And if your criteria is to solve every last little one of these, you know, what do you think you're trying to achieve there? I mean, absolutely try to get as close as you can. But if you don't have any real reason to think that you're really going to get any closer than a free society, then how can you justify it?
Well, that's the thing, is that there's always going to be these imperfections. The more you try to fix something in the government and such, you have these type of these like they try to fix one problem, like 10, 15 other issues pop up. You say, oh, what about education and such? You know, you look at education in this country. You see what's happened there. You know,
right.
You're like, whoa. I mean, you know, you see, okay, we want more, better money, better teachers, and next, you know, it's not that. I mean, you have school classrooms that have like 13, 14, like 16, 17 students in them that just only teach to the test, and then, you know, this stuff is they teach the test, they don't learn anything, and they don't know anything about the real world, and they're stuck, and they're just like, okay, what are we supposed to do? By the time they don't know how to balance a checkbook, they don't know how to do any of the things that help transition to childhood to adulthood.
But they know the Pythagorean theorem.
Well, I mean, come on.
Ben, hold on a second, Ben. I think the echo is coming from your side, so if you could make sure your mic is muted when you're not speaking, that would be great. All right, go ahead, Alex.
Well, you can't expect the school system to actually educate or be effective, because then people will wisen up to the idea that government-run school systems are a bad idea. So it has to be maintained below a certain threshold. Otherwise, people will get too smart.
I think that's what's happening at the charter school. I was talking about this with my daughter the other day, because before Common Core, the charter school had this great curriculum. And once the state mandated Common Core, everyone hates it. The students hate it, the teachers hate it, the administrators hate it, and they're just really all learning that, hey, you know, if you have government stepping in and say this is the way you must do things, it really doesn't always work out like that.
Well,
because
yeah.
things were much better before then.
Yeah, it just seems like, you know, I dig the good intentions. It's always trying to be the good intentions, but it just makes things worse. And when you look at, say like I said, education, and you know, where we do healthcare, the roads, or what have you, you know, how it's just there's, you know, some districts, some communities can do that. You know, some local governments are taking care of roads, or, you know, snow plows or something like that. But then another, you know, county or whatever, something like that is terrible, like not as good as the one that you used to live in. You know, it's these type of things all matter. You know, these things, you know, you have to sit and have to look in these you know, have to know what these you know, how they their structures and such. How do you structure these problems? How to rightly structure these problems and issues and so on. But yet we just have people just say, just throw the government at it; it will work out eventually. No.
Well, that's the thing. It's just such an easy idea. Oh, have the government spend money on it. Oh, have the government pass a rule or some. Oh, people aren't making enough to live on. They need to be paid. You know, they need to be paid more money. So, okay, let's just have government pass the minimum wage. It's not that simple.
Well, another aspect to think about this is that, you know, we're not dealing with people, and I'm not to say that that the people putting forth these ideas aren't people. Of course, they're people. I'm saying that the arguments that they put forward aren't coming from the people themselves being interested in the goals they profess to be interested in. That the arguments are rationalizations, and they're actually emerging from the memes themselves. The ideas have to proliferate, and it's there's a memetics involved in there. That if you start to attack an idea, and if that idea starts, that population of ideas starts to shrink, that the idea will become more desperate to seek out rationalizations to proliferate, because otherwise it's going to die out. So you got to think about that too.
How you doing, Pip?
Hey, how you doing?
Hey, how you doing? I hope you're having a good week. Well, mine. By the way, if the one thing during this great heat wave, you know, that around my way has made me appreciate is having good air conditioning. Because,
amen, brother.
Because last month, I did not have a good air conditioning. I was surviving basically on wall ACs and pretty much my fan you hear in the background.
Oh man, for like a week there, we'd had a problem because it was just running literally 24/7. And you know, when that happens, the unit freezes up. And the only cure for that is to either turn it off or turn it way up to like 80 and just give it a chance to melt. So we were sweltering there for a few days while we were waiting for that to happen.
Today it was 95 in Denver, and the power went out.
Don't talk to me about Don't talk to me about heat. It is cold down here in Australia right now.
Well, it's winter.
Yeah, your seasons.
What do you mean by cold?
Give us some degrees. Tell us how cold it is. Hello.
Man, good for a mute button. I think it's about 10, 11 degrees outside right now. Celsius.
Ooh, that's nice.
Okay, well, Celsius, that's probably
that's 50 degrees Fahrenheit.
Oh, that's
52.
nothing. That's
Please.
nothing. 50 degrees, jeez.
Typical annual low temperature in
context.
Denver is about -5 degrees Fahrenheit, which is, I'll get back to you.
50 degrees is when I think about wearing a jacket.
Yeah. You want to talk about cold. You want to talk about real cold. Go out, because there's some day here in Maryland. It is like it gets down to remember like a couple years ago, it was like 10 degrees, 10, 9, 8 degrees. And it felt like the wind chill. It made it feel like it was like only 2. So,
yeah, come on. I live in Australia where in summer it regularly gets to 100 Fahrenheit.
Oh, it's easily 90s here, and it's so humid it feels like 110. It doesn't get that cold in the winter, but 40s is fairly typical.
Okay, so I just ran the calculation. Denver annual low temperature is typically about -20 C. Put that in your pipe and smoke it.
Well, that just means you're stupid for living there.
Oh, but hey, it can hit into the mid-80s in January in 2015.
And there's all the weed tourism.
Well, are you talking about California or Colorado?
I'm at Colorado.
No, I love it here. You get over 300 days of sunshine a year, and most of the time it's really pleasant. Right now in the evenings, it's very pleasant outside. After sunset, it's typically in the mid-70s to mid-60s.
But yeah, but right now it's a very warm. It is a very warm 80 degrees. So, and it's gonna be like that. Oh, and that's actually a pretty good one. It is like it's gonna get even cooler because it's gonna be raining and on Saturday, so it's gonna be a lot cooler next week. So that's a good place for me.
80 sounds really good.
Yeah, I never really understood the big thing about saunas. If I ever want to experience that, I just go out to my garage. That's what I get.
It's supposed to be a relaxing experience. Supposed to be.
Well, if you're using it properly, it's actually sort of like a shower because it's supposed to open up all your pores, and then you take a dive into a cold pool. So if you don't do that, you're not actually using the sauna properly.
Yeah, that's what I love. We've got a sauna at our local gym, so just go hit the sauna and then go jump into the pool right after. It's amazing. So, Pip, what's going on in Australia these days? You guys got a libertarian movement down there, or what's going on with you guys?
I don't know, man. It's most of the time it feels like we've got 2 Democrat parties.
Ouch.
We cover, Australian stuff from time to time, and it seems like, in the cities like Sydney and Canberra, and the whole thing is no matter which party is in power, they seem to want to, their criteria for making something illegal is how fun is it? If it's fun, you got to ban it.
Yeah. Good thing is the further you get from the cities, the less people care about laws like that.
I always wondered about that because, they talked about the forced gun buyback after Port Arthur, and no one has guns anymore in Australia. How does that apply?
They estimated they actually only got 30% of everyone's guns because people just put them in people just sealed them up in PVC pipes and buried them in their backyards.
Yeah, but I'm wondering if people in like the rural areas and the outback and everywhere, if they even bother doing that.
Actually, people in rural areas get an exception. Mainly because the state probably knows it's unenforceable. Yeah, you get an exception if you own farmland.
Wow.
It's a lot easier to get a license if you own farmland.
Shane, did you ever do an episode on the Emu War in Australia, or ever talk about that and government waste?
I don't think I'm familiar with that one.
Oh man, it's one of Australia's greatest adventures.
We always get brought up on this. It's actually quite annoying. What actually happened is basically a bunch of farmers complained of emu populations destroying farmland, and the government sent out 2 guys, a ute, and a single machine gun. That's it. It was basically 2 guys having a field day out in the bush with a single machine gun.
Right, but the funny thing was...
And then people were like, oh, it was a massive failure. It's like...
Right. but yeah, it was. But here the funny thing was that the government thought, okay, we'll just send these guys out and they'll chase down the emus and get rid of them. And it didn't work out at all. So what the government ended up doing to make it all work was they just put a bounty on emu heads. They put a price on them, incentivized the behavior of killing them, and got more emus eliminated like that than what they spent and just paying those guys to go out there and do the mission originally. Like, that's what I found hilarious about the whole thing.
Yeah, bounties actually work extremely well. There's a place up that bush up north. Oh god, I can't remember the place. I can't remember the name of it now, but it's near a uranium. It's near a uranium field. And it's it's a national park, and they had a serious goat problem. So they put a bounty on the goats, and there's just no goats up there anymore, at all. They've completely eliminated the feral goat population.
It really sounds like something Harry Brown would have advocated, because he was always, looking for that sort of solution. Because with government, if you try to pay someone to do something, it doesn't happen. But if you issue a reward for doing something, like SpaceX with the, not SpaceX, and sorry, with the X Prize or things like that, then all of a sudden, things like private space travel and everything get this shot in the arm.
I think NASA's entire budget should just be inducement prize contests. There's no reason why they should be doing anything other than saying, hey, first person to go to the moon gets $10 billion. There you go. Have at it. Go nuts.
Well, it's like the whole entire Apollo program, from start to finish, from the very first study to the last dime spent on Apollo 17, if you look at all of that and convert it in today's money, it's just like over $100 billion. And imagine if, what was the X Prize? 10 million? Imagine everything that NASA could do if they took that approach to things.
Yeah, it's just absolutely ridiculous. And of course, that you go to NASA's website and you look up at great things about NASA. They got their own advertisement page, and we employ people in every state in the country. What? Why? That's incredibly inefficient. And
exactly. That's sorry for interrupting you, but I don't. That's the thing that got pretty much screwed over Greece, right? They pretty much. They hired like 50% of work, and they didn't do anything. Oops.
Well, that's the difference between government, which thinks about it in terms of jobs, and the free market, which thinks about it in terms of producing things that people actually want or need.
Yeah, and a lot of it just has to do with that fundamental, what is the motivation here? In the 60s, the government they were motivated to beat the Russians to the moon. They wanted that would be a huge bragging rights, and ultimately it paid off for them, because then for decades later they would continue to fund all these programs that would allow their politicians to earmark and spend and do all this. So they actually had the incentive to succeed, and that made all the difference.
Well, and it's like the Pentagon, instead of spending whatever it was, $1.6 trillion on a plane that doesn't really work all that well, instead, saying, okay, we'll give $50 billion and the government contract to the first private company who can build the plane that can pass all these tests and do what we want it to do. Imagine how much cheaper that would end up being.
Oh yes, that would be a very positive and bigger. I mean, think about it. Go, instead of wasting our time, money, and effort in these pointless boondoggles of wars, or just building things that in the end don't work because of jobs, which is I just find it just incredibly sad. I mean, you're building things that for a conflict that doesn't really necessary conflict that may or may not come, and when the conflict does come, the thing you're building is not work. It does not work, and it endangers lives. That's
Well, take SLS, Space Launch System, for example. This program is going to end up costing taxpayers on the order of $50 billion, and and that's only funding it through some testing period. They're not even going to send astronauts to Mars under that allocated portion. And $50 billion, that's an order of magnitude, almost 2 orders of magnitude more than what SpaceX spent on developing its Falcon Heavy. It's going to be an order of magnitude more than what SpaceX will spend on developing the BFR. It's absolutely ridiculous, and all it does is lift stuff up into space. This isn't, this is something that other private companies could do if they spent that $50 billion on Falcon Heavy launches or even Falcon 9 launches, any other launch vehicle, basically, it would be so much cheaper. Why aren't they doing it that way?
Well, again, when you have a blank check, you can do whatever you want, right? That's pretty much it.
That's it.
It's also a lot harder to make sure that you get reelected next year when you can't guarantee that the money's going to get spent in your state, in your district. Whereas when they can say that NASA has employees all over the country, it's a lot easier to justify that spending of that money, even if it's a small amount.
Well, it's easier to justify it to the foolish people who think that electing these selfish the congressman to do just that is a good idea. Not recognize. So many problems. This is why I hate the democratic system we have. Instead, the idea that we have regional representation is so terrible, because it creates precisely that earmark spending in my district so that I get reelected. Because it actually does create incentives for the people in that district to vote for those congressmen, because it will pump a little bit of money into their economy. And it's a tragedy of the commons situation with earmarking. The alternative, I think, I call it transferable representation. Instead of even having elections, we should just be able to appoint people to be able to vote by proxy for us. And so everybody has a vote, basically, directly.
Who would do the appointing?
That's the thing.
You register, maybe not appoint, but register. You register your vote with whichever representative you want. If you want Ron Paul to represent you, all you have to do is go to the congressional website or whatever, select Ron Paul as the guy who votes for you, and then there you go.
That's basically how it happens in the probability broach. And it's amazing how L. Neil Smith in 1980, predicted, or 79, I think it actually was, predicted the internet and live streaming and stuff like that, because that's exactly how it worked. People got onto the telecom, as he called it, and they selected their representative. And whenever they represent, like if 1,000 people select you as their representative, then your vote counts 1,001 times, because you get a vote for yourself too. And the whole thing was telecast, and people would watch and swap their representative just at a moment's notice if all of a sudden they liked what someone else was doing. That's exactly what he said.
That's what we need. Yes, that's exactly how the government should run. These elections are terrible, especially when it comes to gerrymandering. Good Lord, all the problems with that.
Well, I mean, that you can even take care of with just the system they had in medieval Iceland, where your district was just something you selected without even having to move. So like if all the libertarians decided, okay, we want to vote in this one district, we could have our libertarian district without having to have anything like the Free State Project or Free County Project or all these things. We could just pick one, and kind of quote unquote go there en masse, and that would be our district.
Just imagine how much better the world would be if Congress had 49 Democrats, 49 Republicans, and 2 Libertarians.
That would be an interesting little way to manage this type of issue. But we got to ask what type of Libertarians going to be, what type of stuff the Democrats, Republicans are going to be, who are they going to not just be a part of the but also support, because again, at the end of the day, it should be it should be that was the ideal is for the people to vote and make sure it is for the betterment, regardless of what political side you're on. It's for the ability for the betterment for the overall citizenry. That was the whole point and goal of not just the national government, but the local, state, and et cetera, et cetera. It seems that in any type of push to, like, in any type of government or anything else, it seems like it just goes into more corrupt state, because once you have that type of power, that type of national power, it seems like businesses and other corporations seem to just go in and pretty much buy all these politicians. I mean, you could just easily just buy out a politician and just say, hey, babe, for example, a Cory Booker who, has take some campaign donations to some pharmaceutical groups and, lean more in voting into that direction. And how do you stop that type of corruption? Because at the end of the day, these are human beings. And I don't think we should have robots running the Congress and government yet, or should they ever at all. But that's going to be, that's another topic for another time. But my question is, how do you going to make sure to stem corruption in your type of government? What type of state the government have? How do you going to stave it off?
I don't think you
have
can.
Transferable representation. Is that what you're asking about? That proposal? If you have that, the corruption's less big of a deal, because you can't buy votes as easily. You can't, because at a moment's notice, people can and will switch to a representative that more accurately represents them. I don't see how corruption. I'm sure corruption will somehow seep into it, but to a much lesser degree than the current system, which is just rife with corruption because it invites it so heavily.
Yes.
I think you're always going to have corruption as long as you have an authority with the perceived legitimacy to initiate force. You're always going to have corruption when that happens.
Yeah, that's, to me, the one main problem is that corruption. It seems like whatever party gets in, it seems like they're just a rubber stamp of saying it's okay to have this type of corruption, and that's, to me, is just depressing, because it should not be that way. It should be the furtherment of to basically to make sure to push humanity for whatever. Not just that, but also make sure the people under you, your district, your city, state, nation, or whatever, to have the better chance of them being successful, to make sure the justice and all that good stuff prevails and everything else like that. But it just seems like the corruption, regardless of whoever runs the country, it seems like it just continues to stay there. It's this. I don't know how you get rid of it, because if you even try to get rid of it, you're just like exiled to basically like, oh, you're just gonna be in this little, you'll be like a senator or like a representative or whatever. You're just in that island, and they're like, well, okay, you're not gonna help us in our goals. All right, we'll just find somebody else and push them up. That's, to me, that's the frustrating part. Because even if you try to bring back what was the amendment that pretty much had the Senate's not voted on and they were just appointed? What was that? Was it the 14th?
Well, they were appointed originally, and then the 17th made them elected by popular vote.
Yeah, that was originally taken down because of corruption. Now it just seems like the corruption is there because of, well, campaign donations, all these type of things. Because heck, there's a reason why President Obama did not touch, didn't go all hard on the banks, when he got elected. You know what I mean? He let them skate completely. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Let's also not lose sight of the fact that corruption is only part of the problem here, because there are very many principled, well-intended, non-corrupt politicians such as Bernie Sanders who are just dumb and are going to be a disaster if they rise to power anyway.
How you doing there, George?
Hey, Shane, how are you?
How's it going with you?
Oh, working too much, man. Pay all these damn taxes,
Well,
it's been a busy week for me, but it's not even busy in a way that brings money in. It's just other stuff.
I'm sorry to hear that. We got to fix that, brother. We got to keep you doing what you're doing. It's a good thing.
Oh, thanks, man.
How's everybody else? I'm just jumping in here. My apologies for missing the announcement. I heard the first announcement and said, "Oh yeah, this is great. We'll have the live stream today." And then, sure enough, I missed the second one. I was head down in code all day. So,
well, I've been just I've just been sitting here relaxing. Doing uploading my podcast to YouTube and doing all that good stuff, making sure everything is going according to plan, which seems to be. But yeah, I've been making sure not just that, but just editing, writing, and doing some other personal stuff that is just getting, it just made this week a lot more interesting. You know what I mean?
Yeah, this is how I've been the last 10 weeks.
Oh, good for you. That's awesome.
Oh,
I
that's
remember
awesome.
when mine were that little. That's your only little one, or?
That's my first baby. I have an 11-year-old stepson.
Oh, that's awesome. Good for you. You got a full spectrum family. That's awesome.
And no sleep usually is how that goes.
Of course, it gets better, man. Don't sweat it.
It's a very intermittent sleep cycle. I don't think I've slept more than about 4 hours, since he was born.
Yeah, you spend most of your waking hours panicking, or at least I did. I mean, I've got 3 little girls. They're
well, that's after they start crawling. I mean, when they become mobile, the party's over.
What about when they start driving? That's what I'm afraid of.
Oh, that's where my girls are now.
I am honest. I'm totally serious. I hope that little Elon never lives to, or not lives to, learns to drive. Hopefully, by the time he's 16, self-driving cars will have taken off.
Yeah, I want that for myself when I get older. But yeah, I don't know. I couldn't imagine my children driving. I remember what a nut job I was on the road. Gosh, I hope they don't inherit that trait.
I got one with a learner's permit and another about to get one. So
I feel for you. It's on my horizon. So
yeah.
Well, the kids do grow up, so time keeps going forward.
When my brother was 16 or 17 and failed his driver's test a couple of times, he decided that because he didn't have a driver's license, he didn't need to obey road laws. So he would regularly speed everywhere he went and just drove without anyone else in the car because, you don't have a license. So obviously the rules don't apply.
Yeah, I don't
was he like one of those sovereign citizens?
Oh no!
Whoa! What do you think he is? A senator or a part of Congress? I mean, he is a regular citizen, so the laws apply to him more often than not. So, unless you're part of Congress,
the laws will be applied to him.
Yes.
So, what are you talking about, Pip, in the chat there with Australia's new medical system?
Yeah, they're coming out with a new countrywide medical database, just one centralized record for all your medical records, which is going to be
What
really
could
fun.
possibly
Yeah,
go
what could
wrong?
possibly go wrong? It's not like 2 years ago, something like $500,000 in fraudulent Medicare claims because a couple of criminals got a hold of a bunch of Medicare numbers.
Or we had breaches in the Office of Personnel Management and Equifax. And hackers do not like one-stop shops like that at all. No, they prefer to go for the smaller ones.
Yeah, I was just imagining like the crypto attacks that have been going on a lot recently, or more specifically, like going into this year and the beginning of this year. I don't know how much you guys have experience with hearing about any of that stuff, but there was this large brash of attacks where hackers would attack open remote desktop ports and break into computers, or they would send in infected emails and then encrypt a ton of data on servers.
Yep.
And if they didn't have backups, which apparently a lot of people didn't have, they'd end up having to pay the hackers for the decrypt codes.
And worse, most
the crypto
of the time
malware, yeah.
And
Those
they
have been
won't
around a
even
couple of
unlock
years.
they won't even unlock you after you pay a lot of the times. At least corporate wise, we were suffering, or we didn't suffer personally, but the industry was suffering a lot of attacks on MongoDB specifically because out of the box for a very long time it came without appropriate security measures in place. So you'd install MongoDB and everything would look great. You wouldn't realize that you've got a completely open database. So they'd find these things, wait for you to populate it with a bunch of critical data, download it if they thought it was interesting. Otherwise, just delete it and then say, oh, we've downloaded the whole thing. And if you want it back, you'll have to send Bitcoin to this address. And of course, as soon as you send the Bitcoin to that address, you don't hear anything back and you'll get your data back. Because the sheer volume of the number of databases that they were able to confiscate or take over was so large that they wouldn't have sufficient disk space to even store your database, let alone the means by which to transmit that volume of data.
That's not how it works. That's not how what we'll do is they would encrypt it in place, and they would have an automated system where if you send like so many Bitcoin to this address, they'd go ahead and give you the private key to decrypt it. And the thing is, for the first while, they were all doing that. And then you had, I guess, a couple who were just trying to like ride on the coattails without actually doing, just pretended to do it.
Right.
And people didn't get their stuff back because they weren't really encrypting it or whatever. They were just taking the money.
Yeah, that's what affected a few of my customers. Exactly that, Shane. We had one customer.
Now what they're doing is they figured out that it's actually a lot more profitable, instead of trying to do the crypto ransomware, to actually put a crypto miner on your machine and actually have them mine Bitcoin for them or mine.
Yeah.
But you know what? They'll say after all when it fails, but we had good intentions and it will be instantly forgiven.
There was actually one where this guy, I don't know how, he had made millions and millions. And this one security researcher, I don't know if he actually found out his identity, but found out his pseudo identity on the dark web. He was like, look, you've made plenty. There's no possible way. Why don't you just hang it up, retire, and release the private key so that everyone can just do it? And he did. And he got the guy to release the private key. So if that one, I forget which one it is, but one of the crypto malwares, if you get hit with it, you can just download the private key online and just decrypt it.
That's funny. Yeah, from what I recall, there was one of them where the guy who figured out exactly what it was that was causing it, I think it was linked to a domain name or something like that, and somehow they got control of that DNS, or if you could spoof the DNS locally in your own machine, you can get it to unlock. He figured that out, but then he somehow got in trouble with the law. I got to look that one up.
Yeah, we've been covering it on the podcast. I forget the guy's name, but yeah, he figured out that the hackers had put in this weird random domain name just as a kill switch, like if they wanted to stop their own malware. And he figured out that all he had to do was register the domain name, and it would just kind of happen automatically. So he registered the domain name, and he was in Vegas for DEF CON, and he tried to fly back and found out that he couldn't fly back because they canceled his passport, and then they came and arrested him, and he's been fighting it ever since.
Yeah, it was the WannaCry thing, right? Yeah, that's crazy. What was the situation? Why did he get in trouble?
I don't even really know what their motivations are, but they've like everything they initially arrested him for, they dropped, but they've added on a whole bunch of other stuff. And these are charges that not only has the statute of limitations expired, but there's stuff that he allegedly did back when he was a minor, which means they can't get him on that now because it would have had to have been in juvenile court.
Well, don't let their
I'm sure his biggest crime was making everyone look bad.
And the reason why is because they made him look bad. And the house was like, see, we're doing something. See, we're doing something. We're fine, even though there's probably like 10 million other people doing the same thing with the kid. This man, this young person did, and probably doing worse. And they're just saying, see, it's all good. It's, again, it's a nice little circus for people to say, that's
CIA
what it is.
thwarts CIA plot.
That's what it is.
It's clear that these are a bunch of like people who wouldn't know a computer if it bit them on their behind or whatever. They say, well, there's a problem with my computer, turn it off and back on, and they're turning off their monitor and turning it back on. That's the kind of people we're dealing with. These people do not know anything about IT or computers or anything.
I work in IT. I do tech support for a bunch of local businesses around my area, and I run into people all the time who cannot, for the life of them, tell the difference between their computer and their monitor. And it's like, look, the web page that you see up, I know it's yelling at you, and I know it sounds really scary, and I know you can't close it. Just reboot your computer. And they're like, I rebooted it 4 times, and it hasn't gone away.
Oh, you mean the hard drive? You mean you want me to turn off the hard drive, they call it? I love that.
Yeah, the hard drive or the modem or the router. They just throw out computer words, and they have no idea what any of them mean. They're like the blinky box that sits on the floor. And I'm like, I don't know. That could be anything.
Please just spend the next 10 minutes regaling us with the most absurd tales you can remember.
I don't know if anyone will be able to top this one. When I was in college and working with the computer labs there, helping people, kind of like tech support stuff, they'd have a problem, I'd go over and help them. And this one girl, we had just gone over from, you remember the 5 1/4 inch floppies?
Sure.
We just switched over from them to the 3 1/2 inch discs. And this one girl somehow thought it would work to fold up her 5 1/4 inch disc and shove it.
This can't be real.
In the 3 1/2 inch drive.
You're pulling our legs. Come on.
No, I swear.
Well, that's why they call it a floppy disk, right? So you can fold it, it's floppy.
Put it right in your back pocket.
Yeah, sure.
Oh man, that's funny. Yeah, my worst from way back when I was a young man in tech support days was I had this one woman on the phone, and we're going at it for like an hour, and I just can't figure out what's going on, what's wrong with her machine. And we're testing that the keyboard is working and everything, the lights are working when she hits the caps lock button. It turns out that she actually had 2 machines right next to each other, and she had somehow swapped the keyboard's physical locations in front of each machine.
Oh, wow.
We finally, I'm like, it was a real, because as you can imagine, this would cause for some really interesting diagnostic revelations as you're going through trying to, the power's off on, you're sure the computer's off because the lights are still functioning on that keyboard.
Oh, God.
And eventually she's like, oh, you're going to kill me. You won't believe what I did. Well, oh, no, it's fine. What happened? I was much more patient back then, I think. And she had swapped the keyboard somehow. Physically, their physical location.
Up to it, at least
At least we solved the problem, and I was able to get off that phone call.
I have one that's it's similar to that, but it's not a stupid user trick. It's a stupid whoever set up this network trick. There was just one computer that just would not get on the network, and we couldn't figure out why. And it's like, okay, here's this end of the cable. Okay, that's there. That's gonna then go over to the hub, as we had hubs back then. And then check that connector. And then I was about right. Okay, we just need to replace this cable. It's got to be a bad cable. So I unhook it from the back of the computer, and I'm trying to follow it through to the hub. All of a sudden, I reach the other end of the cable. There were 2 different cables with their loose ends in among the tangle of all the other. They were two completely different cables.
That's great. They were trying to communicate via osmosis or something.
So, this isn't one of mine. This is actually my wife, where she works. They were doing a big power cycling thing at her business, so they had everyone unplug their computers before going home on Friday. So Monday comes around and no one can get their computers turned on, and no one has any idea why none of their computers will come on. So they're like, oh yeah, we all unplugged our computers, so you got to plug them back in. Well, some people just unplug their power strips to save time rather than unplugging their computers from them. Ooh. So some of these people thought that they could create infinite power by plugging the power strip into itself.
I've seen that.
I've heard of that one before.
Over Unity much?
Perpetual electricity. That's a new thing.
It's a socialism thing, you know. It's like post-scarcity society. Oh, don't worry. We have infinite resources. We can just give everybody everything they need. We just need AI.
That's MC Escher's power strip.
Yeah.
Here's one. It's not so much a technology thing, just as a scientific literacy thing. When I was a teenager, my friend and I, we wanted to create some weights that we could take to our local pool and use them to sink to the bottom of the pool and walk on the bottom of the pool. So we decided we'd take a 2-liter bottle and fill it with wet sand, and that would be our ballast. And when I was describing this plan to my friend's mother, she said, well, why don't you just fill it with water?
Let's think of the problem here.
Oh, boy.
It needs to be more dense than water.
Density, what's that? What's density?
That's the thing that proves that gravity doesn't exist.
Doesn't believe in gravity, just what do they believe in? Buoyancy or something?
Density and buoyancy.
More and less buoyancy.
But how do you have buoyancy without gravity?
I haven't heard of this. You mean there are people who actually argue against the existence of gravity? Oh, so they think you're held down by the atmosphere or something? Is that what they're arguing?
That is exactly it. They believe you're just less buoyant than air.
What exactly?
We're talking about flat earthers here, just to let you know.
Wow. So, you know, if you go high up enough, then you'll actually just get spit out of the atmosphere, right? Because there must be some central region of pressurization.
No, you'll run into the firmament.
That's when the dome actually stops you from going up any higher.
Oh, because we're in a dome. I see.
Yeah.
You know, sometimes like stupidity doubles over on itself. I was one time reading a flat earther's explanation for gravity, and their explanation was that we are accelerating upward. Okay. And then their response to the counter that we should approach the speed of light and then not be able to accelerate more is that no, that only applies to objects that are traveling less than the speed of light. We're actually going faster than the speed of light, is what they said.
We're already super luminous.
It's like, wait a minute. You didn't even need to explain that away, because the theory of relativity says that you can continuously feel like you're accelerating. That was actually valid.
But then we'd be getting more and more massive the more acceleration that you were applying, and I don't know if that would actually do anything to.
Well, no, they just say that Einstein was wrong, and it was Einstein's relativity is a conspiracy by NASA, even though NASA wasn't formed until 1960 or whatever.
Because of reasons, yeah. Then you ask them funny things about, like, hey, what about Polaris?
NASA wasn't formed until later. They were the real Illuminati before that.
Yeah, that's just what they want you to think.
We got to get Pip to take pictures of the southern. What is it? The Southern Cross. What is the Southern Polaris?
Or whatever.
Southern Cross, yeah.
Anyway, I have to leave and such. I got some stuff I got to do. It's great talk to y'all. Thanks for letting me be a part of this, Shane.
All right, take care, Charles.
All right,
take care, Charles. Yeah, so we'll take simultaneous nighttime photography of the Southern Cross and Polaris, and and say, hey, explain this, boys and girls.
I've tried. They're unsinkable ducks.
Yes, thank you. You know what the real sad thing is that the average person is incapable of articulating a reason, assuming, like, if you're throwing out all authority, pictures from NASA, they're faked and whatnot, the average person is incapable of coming up with a test that an average person can do that will prove that the Earth is round. That's what's really sad.
Well, you just need to be on the equator or roundabouts at night, and you can see the Southern Cross and you can see the Polaris at the same time. You cannot achieve that effect any possible way.
You just need to know someone in a different time zone, call them up, and have them let you know when the sun sets. That's all you need.
They're a shill for the government, Shane.
Right. Now, the way you two are thinking is correct. You look at the sky. So many people are, the first thing, the number one answer I get is, well, it looks round from an airplane.
Yeah, I mean, you can look at the horizon.
If you're high enough, yeah, you go up at a cruising altitude, and you can see if it's the ocean, you can see a curvature.
You'd want to measure it. You need to quantify it.
That's extremely difficult to measure and quantify, and it's really hard because the amount of curvature that you get, even at an airplane's altitude, I believe you can see it, but it's really hard to be sure that you're actually seeing it and not just imagining it. Because I've been in an airplane before, and I've looked out the window and tried to convince myself that the Earth is flat, just to get that paradigm shift visually, that it's a flat Earth, and it looks flat then. And then when I try to imagine that it's round, it looks round.
Simpler than that. You go up into an airplane, how come you can see further?
The air is less dense. The air is less dense, so obviously you can see farther with less dense air. That's
when you descend, you can see far away cities disappear below the horizon and everything.
You just need trigonometry, a telescope with a protractor, and 3 points of reference and some distance to separate you from them, and you can come to the conclusion very easily that the Earth is curved.
Nope. My eyes. I've only ever stood on the ground and seen a flat Earth.
Mark
Obviously,
one eyeball.
That is the only thing I can trust. I can't trust your new math.
That protractor was made by NASA. It lies. Trigonometry lies. It's the devil's work.
Yeah,
Euclid was a shill for NASA.
Yeah.
Honestly, the one thing that always ticks me off about the whole flat Earth thing, it's like, oh, you can see the skyline from Chicago and all that, and it's try doing that literally anywhere else in the world where you don't have a very large, very flat body of water, because light bends better around a cold body of water.
Well, and you could see it hovering above the surface. You could tell that it's a reflection, and it's not the
temperature gradients will create refraction, so you could, without accounting for that, you can't do a lot of observational measurements.
What I'd actually like to see is a series of photographs taken at different temperatures and humidity levels, and I can just imagine the skyline going up and down as you go through the series.
Sounds like data.
It's easy to find,
despite the distance being exactly the same.
It's easy to find, though, a picture of the Chicago skyline from Michigan or somewhere across Lake Michigan, where only the tops of the buildings are visible, and you're missing out on a whole lot of buildings. They just go right down to the horizon and stop.
What about satellites? I mean, can't we just look at satellites and say?
Nope, satellites don't exist.
That's all photoshopped.
Satellites don't exist. They
photoshopped
GPS
the sky.
doesn't exist either.
Are they projected onto the sky? I mean,
GPS doesn't exist either.
GPS is also,
it's all done with cell towers, including when you're out in the middle of the ocean and don't have any cell coverage.
Yeah, I'd like to see them explain the International Space Station, because you can, with a good telescope and the right tracking equipment, you can actually discern the solar panels and stuff on the International Space Station. You can see that it's moving. You can measure how quickly it's moving, how fast across the sky. You could prove and you can make predictions. I've seen the International Space Station twice in one night, and the first time I saw it in the eastern portion of the sky and then in the western portion of the sky, exactly as predicted. I mean, how do they wrap their heads around that?
One of them was trying to convince me. One of them was trying to convince me that, since it's out in space, the International Space Station would get so hot it would melt. And he was talking about because it's out there in the sun heating up for hours. I'm like, it orbits once every 90 minutes, right? So
well,
it's
not
gonna
only
be on-
that, it's also a black
Well,
body
actually,
radiator, so-
interestingly enough, at certain times during the year, the orbit of the space station will precess so that the sun actually doesn't set on the space station. It'll come close to the horizon and then go back up, and that there is a period of a few days where they don't even get a sunset.
I didn't think that was because they're only at what 51 degrees, and they're only like 300 miles up. So I mean that
Yeah, they're very
51
close to
degrees
the
plus, but on top of that is the 21 degrees from the Earth, so that puts them at like 72 degrees. And I think the curvature of the Earth is sharp enough that at time, because I've seen the video, the time-lapse video of the sun making that elliptical pattern where it approaches the horizon and then goes back up, as seen from the space station. It does occasionally happen.
I'll have to check that out.
That sounds like the sunrise sunset on polar regions on fast forward.
That's basically what it would be, yeah. Because what you would say, like if you were on the North Pole or right on the South Pole or something like that, you'd basically have perpetual darkness, and then you'd see like the sun spiral up to whatever its maximum height would be. Then it would start spiraling back down, and all the time you're in perpetual daylight for 6 months, and then it spirals down below the horizon, and you got perpetual darkness for 6 months.
Yeah, but there's never perpetual darkness on the space station.
Dun, dun, dun. Sorry, that felt necessary. I'll shut up now.
Right, there couldn't be because it's always going to be...
Right, if its orbital plane is perpendicular to the to the line from the Earth to the Sun, or orthogonal, then it's going to be in perpetual sunlight. It can't stay in the shadow because then it would have to be offset, and the orbital plane would not intersect the center of the Earth, and it would be it couldn't do it.
Yeah, even if it were
its thrusters.
Even if you have a completely polar orbit, there wouldn't be any point where it was in perpetual darkness, because it would have to be, when it was at 90 degrees like that, it would be perpetual sunlight because it would be at right angles to the sun.
I'm trying to think if there's a place
Who
behind
else here
me.
plays Kerbal Space Program?
I always want to, but I never have time.
I highly recommend that game to anybody who wants to learn about orbital mechanics. You will learn so much so quickly.
Oh yeah, that it's. I base most of what I know about orbital mechanics is based off me just experimenting with things in Kerbal Space Program, especially if you get like one of the mods that actually creates a 1-to-1 approximation of our solar system in the game, including planetary tilts and all that.
Realism Overhaul, that's a good one. I've heard there's also one that corrects the patched conics, so you get things like orbital plane precession and Lagrange points.
And I know nothing of this subject. You guys are well beyond my understanding of physics.
Okay, so
yeah, I know the weird stuff. Like if you're like behind a satellite that's in orbit and you want to catch up to it, you have to slow down.
Actually slow down, yeah.
Yeah, because then you drop into a lower
You'll
orbit.
drop lower and then you'll pass it, then you have to speed up and it will catch up with you. Yeah. It's weird.
Right, you take a shorter path around the Earth, and also your speed actually increases as you drop lower in altitude. Very counterintuitive. You learn all of these things in Kerbal Space Program, but you don't learn about Lagrange points. Lagrange points are pretty cool.
Oh, they're awesome. What about the fact that the moon is falling up?
That's a tidal. That's basically tidal transfer of energy. Rotational energy of the Earth is transferred to the orbit of the moon via tidal forces pulling the moon ahead because the continents push that tidal bulge forward in the orbit.
That's what's slowing
and
our
actually,
days down, I guess.
And it's pulling the moon forward, which speeds it up, which causes it to go into a higher orbit.
Yeah, if the Earth were rotating the opposite direction, it would be slowing it down.
So our days are getting longer because of that too, I assume.
Yes, that is true.
They think the Earth originally had, what was it, 15-hour days, and the moon slowed it down to 24 hours.
I kind of want a Martian day. I want like a 25, 26-hour day. That'd be perfect.
Well, eventually, when the moon is totally ejected or pushed to the further out in the orbit, the days will reach about 25 hours. They're not going to get any slower than that, though.
But they say that the human circadian rhythm is actually closer to 25 hours instead of 24, and that's why so many people have sleep problems.
Yeah, that's how I feel.
That's why I want to go to Mars.
Yeah, Mars sounds nice.
Yeah, because the sol is closer to the circadian rhythm than a day.
Robert Heinlein. If only his world were true.
You know what I want to see? I want to see them build a lunar space elevator. So a space elevator on Earth, it's pretty much impossible. It's impossible. I'm going to say it. It's impossible. They say it's possible with perfect carbon nanotube filaments, but no, for all practical purposes, it is impossible to build a space elevator on Earth. But with the moon, you can build an untapered space elevator out of existing materials like Xylon. It can be done very easily.
So like on the moon, you would have this line going down to the L point between
Earth and
the moon and Earth, and then you'd have a space station there, and then you could just go up and down that elevator.
Yeah, I think that's Earth Moon L1.
I can never remember the numbers.
I know that 3 is opposite the moon, and 4 and 5 are those wonky triangular points. But L1 and L2 I always get confused on. I think it's Earth Moon L1 that would be the station. You could also do it to Earth Moon L2. But anyway.
You'd need your orbital mass to be slightly further towards the Earth than that, so you could compensate for the mass that you're going to be carrying up.
Yes, there needs to be a tensile mass on there, but the station that you would be going to would be at the Lagrange point.
I think like this my point was I think it has to be slightly past that point to accommodate the additional mass that would be added to the tether when you're climbing it.
Right, yes. To hold
Otherwise, you'd pull it down. Yeah, you'd pull it down.
Does it have
the tether would be like curved in one direction or the other to account for that. I forget exactly how that goes. But it's like with the Earth, if you're going to try to do it, it has to be up in the Clark belt because it has to rotate around with the Earth. But since the moon always keeps the same face to the Earth, that's not an issue there.
Right. Yeah, it's a centripetal thing with the rotation of the Earth, but it's a purely gravitational thing with the Lagrange point in the moon.
Yeah. And you know there is another idea for a non-rocket space launch system on Earth that is much more practical than a space elevator. That's called a Lofstrom loop.
The spiral.
LOFSPROM loop. It's not a spiral. What it is okay. Imagine taking a garden hose and holding it about 3 or 4 feet from the end, and you turn on the hose. Well, that hose is going to want to straighten out because the water flowing through it has a lot of momentum, and it doesn't. And if you deflect the angle a little bit, it pushes force towards trying to straighten it out. So it's the same basic concept is what could support like a bridge in the sky. Basically, you have a rotor, which is like a steel cable magnetically levitated inside a vacuum tube. And the rotor is moving at more than orbital velocity, right? So the straightening force of that rotor, the natural curvature that it'll make with the balance of the weight pushing down on it from the sheath and the rotor moving on the inside can be matched to the curvature of the Earth. And deflecting it further down, it supplies the force to keep the whole thing aloft. So it's a loop that goes from one point and it goes up and across over the surface of the Earth and then back down, and it's held by tethers, and turns around and goes back up and back. So it's a loop like that.
So a lot of continuous energy getting dumped into this thing.
You have to, well, it's in a vacuum chamber, so keeping it moving is not all that difficult, but you do have to maintain that speed with linear motors acting on the rotor, and also
electromagnets.
The proposal suggests that using the rotor itself, using magnetic induction in the rotor to pull a spacecraft on the track above it. And so you lose a little bit of momentum, but I mean, the whole system's gigantic. So it's in the grand scheme of things, very small, but that can propel a spacecraft up to orbital velocity or beyond without using jet propulsion.
Wow, the atmospheric friction must be pretty tremendous at those speeds, especially when you dip back down.
There's no atmospheric friction because
you're in the vacuum. You're in the tube.
Yeah.
So
no, you're not in the tube. You're above the atmosphere. The tube is supported above the atmosphere of the Earth at like 80 kilometers or something.
I'll have to look it up because I'm picturing a return loop. Is there a return loop?
There's two. The loop is this cable in the sheath, and it goes up and across the surface of the Earth, and then goes back down, loops back, and then comes back up, back over, and back down. So it's like taking a rubber band and pinching it at both ends and laying it across the surface of the Earth, and then picking up the middle points of the rubber band and tilting them so that's above the atmosphere at the along the top.
I'll have to look it up. Can you spell it again?
Lofstrom loop. Lofstrom. Lofstrom loop.
Isn't there like an umlaut over the O or something like that?
No, it was.
Or am I thinking about something else?
It was an American engineer who developed this idea. I actually emailed him and asked him a couple of questions about it. He's all like, "Oh, you're really perceptive for asking me these questions about expansion joints." And I'm like, "Oh, thank you. That was like the best compliment I ever had, having this like famous engineer tell me, oh, you're."
So this thing loops back down on itself. It does. There's a turnaround at each end. I think you need to keep it continuously running, otherwise it'll fall down.
Right. So and lifting it up into that position in the first place is kind of tricky. You have to have I think you could zigzag it along so that there's slack, and then as you build it up to speed, then you carefully apply tension in the right way so that it rises up and the zigzags dissipate. But it's there's more details, I think.
This thing seems kind of hairy to make. Yeah. I've seen some high velocity projectile proposals that use some pretty interesting acceleration mechanisms with like rotating tubes, but that's no good for human beings because of the force involved.
The problem with all of those, like a slingotron, I think is what you're describing, and the problem with all of those other proposals is that it involves building a structure that is supported above the atmosphere. Because otherwise, obviously, when you get up to orbital velocity and you hit the atmosphere, you're just going to explode, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So building a structure that extends above the atmosphere, a compressive structure, is pretty much impractical. You could build it out of pure diamonds, and it's still going to break and collapse down, and you can't do it. So
a block of steel 7 miles cubic will collapse under its own weight.
So you have to use this physics trick of constantly redirecting high momentum material, and that's what the Lofstrom loop does. Another exploit of the same basic physics is what's called a space fountain, where you have a stream of particles. So you have like cannons at the surface of the Earth shooting these projectiles up, and they're being guided into tubes and redirected back down towards the Earth at hypervelocity, and that constant stream of particles shooting up It's like supporting a platform above the atmosphere with a machine gun.
Right.
And,
say goodbye to your atmosphere, though.
It's
You're just going to spit your atmosphere off into space that way.
Well, no, that not exactly. I mean, it's just extremely infeasible. There's no way of doing it. But the Lofstrom loop seems to be the one that has the fewest technical challenges of any non-jet propulsion space launch system that I've seen. The other one that I've seen that almost seems practical is called a skyhook, and basically you take a tether.
Yeah, I was going to mention this one.
Right, a tether that's tumbling through space such that the end of the tether is pretty much stationary in the atmosphere, right? So that could conceivably be constructed, maybe not with current materials like Kevlar or Dyneema, but maybe with near future materials. Imperfect carbon nanotube threads might be sufficient to create skyhooks. But there's a lot of technical challenges in that as well. And, you know, obviously, every time that dips into the atmosphere...
Yeah, it's going to re-enter every time. It's going to center away.
Well, with the right configuration, that the aerodynamic forces aren't enough to, like, burn it up. But it's going to be providing resistance. So you have to very consistently be using that tether to bring reaction mass up to the nexus of the tether, and then have a highly efficient engine ejecting that mass to maintain that orbital velocity, so that the thing's orbit doesn't decay or its rotation doesn't decay. Either one. They're
super pie in the sky ideas. I just want to see better inertial efficiency on propellant-based launches, like nuclear-based rockets and things like that, come into. You know, if you've ever read some of Heinlein's stuff, some of his stuff from the 40s and stuff, he's talking about using like tin as a propellant. But you know, now we know that's like the worst possible thing you could do because the velocities involved would be so low. You want to use something like hydrogen if you can.
Well, hydrogen is optimal. Nuclear rockets could be done, but they do create radioactive exhaust plumes, extremely environmentally unfriendly. As much as a proponent of nuclear power I don't think that nuclear rockets to get off of the Earth is a good idea. Now, once you get to space, it's not so much a problem, but launching from the launch pad with nuclear rockets, I think, is a bad idea. But metallic hydrogen, that is... an interesting, if we can figure out a way to produce mass-produce metallic hydrogen.
Well, it's easy. You just go to the center of Jupiter and you pick some up and you just carry it home, because you would need that kind of a pressure vessel to be able to survive the core of Jupiter in order to make this work anyway, so you might as well just do that.
But metallic hydrogen is believed to be metastable, so you could actually, once it's in that metallic form,
I've never heard of that before.
It might actually be stable enough that it takes some sort of triggering event to get it to decompose into diatomic hydrogen.
You just got your funding to study it because the military wants to use it as a bomb. It sounds perfect.
Oh,
think about all the energy.
A fantastic bomb. It would be about 50 times more powerful than the current explosives we have.
What's that red material in that Star Trek movie where they drop
red matter?
It sounds like red matter because it's like this ridiculously dense stuff that, you know, it's like almost neutrons touching, I guess. And you know, you're just going to drop this tiny little blob of it and it's going to expand to the size of...
It's not actually ridiculously dense. It would, I imagine it would be one of the lightest solid materials, non-porous solid materials out there. It's just a tremendous amount of energy is released when it decomposes into diatomic hydrogen. You're talking about 1 or 2 orders of magnitude more energy than is released when you burn a hydrogen with oxygen. Now, that means that your specific impulse will increase 5 to 10 fold. And that is enough that you could make, very practically make single stage to orbit vehicles, because it could get from the surface of the Earth all the way to orbit and then propulsively land without having to do aerobraking, all on one tank of gas.
Well,
what do you think of the idea from science fiction, if it's ever going to be feasible for stuff that is like so horrible it absolutely cannot be allowed to stay on Earth or even in orbit? You know, they talk about just taking it and launching it into the sun, but I mean, you'd have to arrest Earth's orbital velocity because it's in orbit with Earth. You know, would that ever be feasible? I mean, maybe by slingshotting around Venus or something.
There's a cheap way to do that, but in order to launch stuff cheaply into the sun, you actually counterintuitively have to go into a highly elliptical orbit far from the Earth. You actually want to go away first, then you come back in at a steep angle.
It's actually, and what the easiest way to get, trying to launch into the sun is actually a really bad idea, because it takes more delta V to get to the sun than it does to get away from the sun forever. And also, you don't have to worry about this horribly toxically radioactive stuff hitting the sun and then creating a plume that hits Earth, right? So, the easiest thing to do would be to launch it on a trajectory that takes it past Venus. And then at Venus, it can do a flyby, and then it has to do maybe one other flyby, or you do a burn as you're flying by Venus, and you can take that on an escape trajectory out of the solar system, never to come back again.
Oh, okay. So you're saying launch out. Yeah, I was thinking you'd go out past you know, Mars, towards Jupiter, and then at apogee make a small correction burn, and you'd be basically headed straight back in towards the sun.
Yeah,
well, that's the thing. You just make the orbit highly elliptical, so it'll come back. And one of the things I was reading, it's not an issue for the kind of thing you were saying there, Alex, because what they were doing was like they were getting rid of all like the biological warfare stuff, and it was like living things, so the sun would destroy it all.
Oh yeah, that makes sense. And I suppose even sending it on an escape trajectory out of the solar system could be potentially risky, because if somebody gains knowledge as to where that capsule, you know, what trajectory that capsule has been put on, they could conceivably go and retrieve it, maybe in the distant future. So, yeah, but if you wanted to send something into the sun, you first send it to Venus, fly by Venus, or, you know, possibly Mars, or, you know, you can even use the Earth as to generate its own flybys, the Earth and the Moon and stuff. There's all kinds of maneuvers that you can learn about with Kerbal Space Program. But yeah, flying directly from the Earth to the sun takes an exorbitant amount of delta V. They've never actually done that because it takes an incredible amount of energy. You need something like a Saturn V to get a very small mass actually on a direct sun drive trajectory.
Wouldn't it be easy to simply dump it into Jupiter's atmosphere? You're never getting anything back out of there.
Yeah, actually, and you would actually reach higher temperatures colliding with Jupiter than you would going into the sun, believe it or not.
Now, why is that?
Dense atmosphere, man. It's nasty.
Right. Well, the sun, I mean, yeah, the escape velocity from Jupiter's surface is ridiculously high, and the amount of heating that you get is proportional to like the 4th or 5th power of the velocity when you come into Jupiter. That's why the Galileo spacecraft had to have something like, it was like the majority of its mass was just the heat shield, so that it could enter into Jupiter's atmosphere protected. But there's another factor. If you were to do a direct sun dive, there might be enough radiation pressure or solar wind to slow that down, and the atmosphere builds up so slowly that basically the maximum temperature you get during entry during the sun, I'm not sure. I haven't run the numbers, but it might actually be lower than what you get at Jupiter, because Jupiter's atmosphere is much more appears much more suddenly as you descend because it's colder.
Interesting. So there'd be some decelerating effect due to the outward energy. Yeah, I just looked it up. The density of the sun, and I mean this is an aggregate and a guesstimate, just like Jupiter's is, I'm sure, is 1.41 grams per centimeter cubed. Jupiter is 1.33. So the sun is only slightly more dense than Jupiter, oddly, due to the outward pressure from the reaction going on in the core and the all the energy. But I guess all things being equal, it is still slightly more dense. So I mean. Yeah, but barring that outer
density of the surface, I guess would be the operative question.
The gradient. Then what you're describing is that outward gradient, that like extended atmosphere, the heliosphere, that would provide, I guess, gradual breaking.
Right. You can even see with an Earth-based telescope that prominences on the sun, showing that the atmosphere is extremely
huge.
The pressure gradient of the sun's atmosphere is very drawn out. So you have to travel through quite a lot of space to hit a 1 atmosphere pressure. During that space, the pressure is very gradually building up. Now with Jupiter, within I would imagine a couple 100 miles or so, the atmosphere goes from effectively a vacuum to atmospheric pressure, and where in the sun it might take several thousand miles to do that.
The weird stuff we talk about.
Yeah, you just never know.
Yeah, I really should send this question to Randall Munro. Does something actually get hotter? His What If series, XKCD. Would something actually get hotter slamming into Jupiter or slamming into the sun? I think it would get hotter slamming into Jupiter, but I can't be certain.
Well,
all other things being equal.
Well, I brought it up because it's like you don't want something to melt and then the solar winds just scatter it all over the solar system. But if you really don't want retrieval, if somebody figures out the trajectory and goes and retrieves it, it will just dump it into Jupiter. Nobody's going to get anything out of there.
Yeah.
Jupiter's hollow. And the Earth is flat.
Do they know whether or not Arthur C. Clarke was right when he made the core of Jupiter diamond?
I don't believe there might be a diamond layer in Jupiter, but I think the mainstream understanding is that Jupiter's core is mostly metallic hydrogen.
How far down would you have to go? What kind of pressure to get metallic hydrogen?
I really have no idea. They have just only barely been able to produce metallic hydrogen. If they have produced, they don't even know if they have produced metallic hydrogen in the lab, but it's at a pressure that's so high that even the diamond anvils that they use to make it shatter, and it's so incredibly difficult to get that high enough pressure that maybe they've done it once.
Would it be more effective to make it in like a particle collider or something? Or would it just not last? Would it instantly evaporate?
I think it would instantly react and disassociate back into a diatomic hydrogen.
Or talking about liquid metallic hydrogen again. Sorry, I had to disappear. My 3-year-old came in to show me her bee sting. Mommy took care of it, and she says, "Mommy put cream on it so it doesn't hurt anymore." So that's good.
Good, mommy.
Yeah. What about just supercooling? I mean, what if you just took as much energy out of the thing as you could? Would it allow the electrons to collapse sufficiently to give you metallic hydrogen?
That I do not know. I would imagine that they would have already done that because we've made Einstein-Bose condensate, which is like a billionth of a degree from absolute zero or even less. So they can make things cold enough that if it were possible to make metallic hydrogen that way, I think they would have done it.
What about lasers then, like they're trying to do with fusion?
Lasers produce a really high temperature. The problem is to make metastable metallic hydrogen, you have to make it at a low temperature, which requires that extremely high pressure. Lasers used for fusion, they create it's
high pressure but high temperature.
They shine these lasers on like a little bead about the size of a BB, right? A bead made of plastic, and the lasers react with the plastic resin, and it ablates off that plastic resin. Basically, the bead explodes from the outside in, so the shock wave collapses in towards the center, and at the core they have a little bit of deuterium or tritium or whatever their analyte is, and a tiny fraction of that will fuse.
Maybe something weird with ultrasonics, because you could, well,
that's an interesting idea. But here's the problem: whenever you apply a pressure rapidly, that act of applying pressure generates heat. So it would you've got to
apply pressure though, so you're gonna have to do it gradually. I mean, unless
so that you can dissipate the heat as it's being applied. Hence, they use the diamond anvils. But I think you're onto something, because I think that in order to reach the pressures that they do, when they have the diamond anvils up to the highest pressure that they can sustain, they they somehow they don't apply the pressure continuously. I think it's like pulsed pressure, because otherwise the diamonds will just shatter.
Or we could just use Jupiter. Gravity seems to work.
Yeah, how are you going to get the metallic hydrogen from the core of Jupiter?
Well, maybe. What if we fired a extraordinarily high-speed projectile, or redirected a high-speed projectile at Jupiter, and tried to get it to blast a chunk of it off or something, or through it?
Yeah,
we need to get something up to a significant part of C.
Right.
Yeah, we could.
Wouldn't that cause it to detonate, and
Maybe
then
we could
you
detonate
just blow up Jupiter?
I think it was a Jack Handy quote. It says, even though there's no life on Jupiter, I still think we should declare it an enemy planet. Which I always thought was kind of funny.
This is why subreddits like HFY exist.
Jack Handy was like the first XKCD. I mean, it's like, if you ever fall off a really tall building, just go limp, because somebody might think you're a dummy and try to catch you because, hey,
it's been great.
Free dummy. All right, man. Good talking with you. Thanks.
We'll see you.
Yeah, this was really fun.
That's a smart dude.
Yeah, he is. I never would have been able to do that Thunderfoot Hyperloop series without him.
Oh, really? He helped you with that one? That's awesome.
Yeah, all except for, I think, the last one, or maybe the last two, because he dropped out because it just created too much drama. And I think this weekend is when they're doing the Hyperloop speed test, so I'm kind of ready for Thunderfoot to make his,
And this is absolutely absurd. We're going to build this giant tube and blah, blah, blah. You can't do it. Reasons.
Why is he complaining? It's still in prototype stage. This is what prototyping looks like.
He doesn't know that. I don't think he's done any engineering a day in his life.
Or he's just a super troll, maybe. I don't know. Why would he want to? Maybe he just wants to be, inflammatory. I don't know.
Yeah, it's something popular. He can get some attention doing it.
I'm really good at being wrong. I'm tremendously good at being wrong. All the time I'm wrong. But
every human being has an infinite capacity to be wrong.
But what I'm equally good at is fussing up to it and learning from my mistakes. So why can't some people seem to do this? My 5-year-old is one of them. She's going to learn it, though. She's going to figure it out that it's better to learn from your mistakes. But why can't some people just, say, hey, you know what? You're right. That's a great point. And then try to think as to why that may not be the case, and hey, suddenly we've got this science thing going on. We've made observations and we can prove or disprove whether or not this happened or this didn't happen. And, this is how things, this is how we work, this is how we do things. But no, you're just going to continue to repeat repeatedly the same misnomers over and over and over again. It doesn't make sense.
Well, it's like he's linked so much of his ego to it that, I mean, at this point, he can't even Yeah, but kind of like an egotistical sunk cost fallacy, where he just can't admit it now because then it would be this, amazing hit to his character.
Or a major boon for his character because he comes clean and says, hey, you know what? You're absolutely right. And let's look at this from a different angle. And I'll still try to shoot it down because, that's the direction that I took. But I'm going to try to find reasons that actually haven't been tested or make sense or have some, some link and, that don't involve Mythbusters crushing a vessel made to hold the liquid and not hold a vacuum.
Oh man, there were so many things wrong. I don't even think I even scratched the surface of everything that was wrong with that. I mean, I hit the big ones. There's no internal structure. It's positive and not negative.
It'll take infinite amounts of energy. The seals can't possibly work. Even though we're really good at that sort of thing. And
yeah,
someone will shoot it with a BB gun and it will implode. Funny stuff. So I'm curious to see what they're going to be doing with the moon. Sounds like NASA's looking to go to put a station in orbit around the moon soon, and by soon I mean sometime in the mid 2020s. So I should still be alive for that. It sounds like fun.
Yeah.
Too bad they're spending other people's money to do it.
Yeah, I was like 1 year old when the moon landing happened, and it's like, okay, I wasn't old enough to experience that, so I always thought, I gotta stick around long enough for the first Mars landing. That's what I gotta stick around for.
I think we'll make it. We'll see. Time will tell.
Hey, 10 minutes to go. If anyone has another subject.
What do you guys think of this whole thorium nuclear power thing, or molten salt in general?
That's actually what they were looking at originally, like in the 50s.
Yeah, the MSR, the molten salt reactor project, and they abandoned it for political reasons and for.
Well, it was because they wanted. It was because they wanted to get aircraft reactors, and molten salt reactors use convection, which stops when an aircraft goes into a dive. And so then at some point, because they made all this stuff about, okay, here's how you can do this using uranium and water. And then at some point they said, okay, we're not going to do the aircraft reactors. But then no one stopped to think and say, okay, well, we're not doing this anymore. We don't need all of this complicated crap that we've done. We can go back to the simpler MSRs. They just kept going with what they had.
And they had some material sciences issues, like with the Hastelloy and the temperatures and the neutron densities that they were achieving and doing damages on the atomic level to the steel itself. But I mean, that stuff seems all really, it's material sciences stuff. We could figure that out. And they had it running for like 4 years or something like that. So I mean, it's.
But they also have designs for sodium-cooled uranium reactors. And I mean, the thing is, regardless of which way you go, the boiling point of sodium is so high that it is absolutely impossible for it to melt down, because the reason why it melts down is the water boils away. Right. But sodium boils at just such a high temperature that would never happen.
Yeah, they seem so much safer. I mean, especially with it's gravity provides a fail safe with the MSR, or at least the LFTR, the lifter. The designs that I've been looking at, where they've got this salt plug in the bottom of the vessel that is maintained as a solid by active cooling, and if there's a power failure, it simply melts out and goes to leaves the reactor section, which doesn't allow for conditions where there's high enough neutron density to maintain reactivity. So it just stops. It just turns itself off. You could literally walk away from this thing, and it'll just turn itself off. It's brilliant.
Yeah.
It's like, come on, why can't we do this? I mean, you got things like Chernobyl, where they had like positive coefficient of reactivity thermally. So like the hotter it got, the more dangerous it got. Whereas this thing has got the opposite. It's, negative coefficient. So the hotter it gets, the more the material expands. Your actual fissile material the fuel is actually, it's the liquid. So it expands and it becomes less reactive because the neutron densities drop. So it's like self-regulating. It's beautiful. It's like, it's all these obvious, you know, the stuff I've read about. I mean, I'm no expert in it, but it seems like, why aren't we doing this? What's the problem? Like, why is there so much pushback, and why aren't regulators jumping hand over fist to try to, you know, get the United States and, you know, Canada? Why aren't they trying to get into this thing?
Yeah, I mean, we have gotten so far behind all sorts of other countries in nuclear power just because, you know, but they've just kowtowed to all the fearmongers about it. But I mean, how many people know that? Like, I think people think that Fukushima was the only reactor, the only nuclear power facility in Japan, because any others, of course, would have had another disaster. And no one seems to know that what's the city? Onagawa, something like that. There was a nuclear reactor that was almost right on the epicenter of the earthquake. It just weathered it fine because it was a later design.
And it probably didn't get hit by a tidal wave, right?
Well, it did, but they had a sufficient. It did, but it got hit. They had a sufficient barrier for it.
They didn't put their generator in the basement.
Didn't the reactor?
Yeah, they actually protected their generators from a tidal wave. Yeah, that one. Because it was the tidal wave the tsunami took out the backup generators, and without the backup generators, you know, it melted down. So because the backup generators were pumping water.
Was like the oldest generator at Fukushima. It's like the first generator. Because there are four generations of generators there, and it happened to be the oldest one. All the other three were fine.
Yeah, I mean, there are about
the same tidal wave.
There are about 1 million different reasons why, if Fukushima had been built like 5 years later, the disaster wouldn't have happened, because at that point they had the technology to correct for it all.
If it wasn't a light water reactor, it wouldn't have happened either. And that's why the whole MSR thing bothers me so immensely, because I see it as being such a boon for humanity. We would have really true energy independence. We'd be able to make as much energy for whatever reason. We could make liquid petroleum products from, you know, we can extract carbon from the atmosphere, carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, carbon dioxide from the ocean, because carbon dioxide potential in the atmosphere is the same as that of the ocean. You just heat up the water and the carbon dioxide bubbles out. You know, you could use it as part of your cooling process. And you're talking about such a high temperature process that these things run at like 900 degrees C or something like that. You can use that process heat to convert your carbons and your hydrogen from, let's say, splitting water into oxygen and hydrogen thermally or electrochemically. You can then turn that into, you know, methane, and you can make diesel fuel. I mean, you can make anything you want to make from it. Make plastics from it, all from thorium, or you know, you could use uranium also. But I mean, also the percentage, from what I understand, the percentage of the fuel that's consumed is like 90 some odd %, whereas like currently it's like less than 5% of the fuel with uranium reactors it's being consumed. The rest is waste, because the way that they have to make these fuel rods, because they build up gas internally, they get these fractures, and they have to stop using them at a certain point. You have to take the rod out and reprocess it, and it gets very, very expensive and very dangerous, and you have to handle this stuff all the time. Whereas these the MSR, the molten salt reactors, they don't have these problems, and they're able to consume the fuel down to like nothing. You get, so not only is it using a more available fuel, it's using it completely. You know, you get very little waste percentile wise, and that waste, although it's much more gamma heavy, it's like it got a lot more dangerous radiation. The radiation levels are substantially higher. It's got a half-life of something like a couple hundred years. So you just have to keep this stuff safe for a couple hundred years. We could figure out how to keep things safe for a couple hundred years. You know, we'll still be human beings and you know, speaking languages with our mouths. Then we'll be able to communicate the fact, hey, don't go over there, it's dangerous. But to keep something geologically stable for like 100,000 years, which is what we'd have to do with waste from our current reactors, it's just not practical. I mean, how can you do that? You're gonna have to make signs that mean something to what's effectively a different species of intelligent beings by the time 100,000 years goes by. How are you gonna do that? It's just not sane to try to store that type of stuff. I mean, we've got the technology. Why are we not using it?
Well, and I think the stuff they have on the drawing board, which is probably, you know, 30 years at least away from being a reality, but still stuff they have on the drawing board. As long as you have any kind of radioactive output that's significantly above the background radiation, you just add it in as you enrich everything, and you can use like almost every last little bit of radioactivity to generate electricity. So, I mean, they've got designs that are just like mind-bogglingly efficient, like 99.9% or something like that.
They seem so much more simple and so much more stable. I mean, you know, you're not dealing with control rods and things like that. You're basically you basically turn the reactor up by taking more heat out, because it's a negative coefficient. So when you make it colder by pulling heat out of the system by using it, it makes the fissile material higher density because it's colder now, which makes it react more strongly. So it's like, well, how do you go faster? Well, you present it with a bigger hill, you know, and it just turns itself up. It's there's no output, you know, I think there's some xenon and stuff like that comes out of it, but it's, you know, you're not dealing with water, so you're not dealing with hydrogen, you know, you're not making, you know, an explosive gas mixture as a, you know, no zirconium. There's no casings to react with the water to create hydrogen and oxygen. So you don't need this gigantic containment building with, like, you know, 10-foot thick, high grade concrete, you know, superstructure. You need something like the size of a house, you know, as your containment building.
Yeah. All right, literally the last minute, 1 minute to go. Any last words you guys want to get in?
Thanks for doing what you do, and it's been really nice talking with you guys. I know I don't make it all the time, but when I do, it's always a pleasure for me.
Oh, it's been great, George. You still around, Pip?
Yeah, I'm still around.
All right. Anything to say before we sign out?
Yeah, I just went and looked it up. It's the national park that I was talking about with the you know, the goat bounties at the start when I came in. It was Arkaroola and the Gammon Ranges National Park in South Australia. It's interesting because they've got a uranium mining operation, because there's uranium in the groundwater up there. They basically just pump it out of the ground and wait for the uranium to solidify. That's how
just
they
filter it out. You don't even need to dig the ground.
You just filter out of the water. They've got like hot springs up there. They've actually got radioactive hot springs up there, which is pretty interesting. You wouldn't want to swim in it. But,
I was going to say, don't go swim in there.
Yeah. Someone tried to... There's like there's a story of this failed health spa up there.
They used to think uranium was good for you back in the day, but I know Shane's got to go, so I don't want to... I'll dive right into that, and then I'll...
No, it's good. Yeah, but I've heard of things like that. There's like, you know, a radioactive springs, and they're like, yeah, let's have, you know, I guess there would be something like a hot tub. You know, you bathe in the spring and soak in it, and it's great. So soak up all that healthy radiation.
What it is surprising just how much radiation the human body can take before you start having problems.
Well, I think the thing is, if you ingest it, or if you've got something like an open sore or something.
Yeah,
like
alpha
that.
particle emitters. If you get some, if you breathe it in or if you eat it, it can really mess you up. But there's actually a lot of studies that suggest that up to a certain level of radiation, certain ranges of it are actually beneficial. I was reading something about a study of a certain area in Iraq where the native peoples from this particular area that have a substantially higher than average background radiation have a much lower propensity for getting cancers of certain types. But you know, I mean, I'd have to do your own research there. This is third party information.
Yeah, I've heard of it. I've kind of looked into it. I don't think it's a done deal. You know, some are saying that, you know, below a certain level it's healthy, and below a certain level it's just not harmful. It's one of those two. It's not the case that, oh, even a tiny little amount of radiation is bad for you. I don't think anyone thinks that. Well, no scientist thinks that.
It's definitely not linear, that's for sure.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, guys, and thanks everyone else who supported, and thanks everyone who viewed this. We'll see you next month. Until then, stay strong and be free.